Chapter 10. Jenny finally fell asleep when the sun came out, but the house was far from quiet. The staff huddled in the kitchen, their voices hushed but tense. Plates clinked louder than usual, nerves rattled from another restless night. She was screaming, one of the maids whispered, wringing her hands in her apron. It didn't sound like a bad dream. It sounded like she was being murdered. "She's not safe," another muttered. "Someone needs to do something. What if she sleepwalks into the pool? Or falls again?" "She already did," someone else said. "Second floor balcony, remember?" "I'm telling you, this isn't just stress. They say night terrors can be caused by trauma," the younger housekeeper added. "Or neurological stuff. She needs to be in a hospital. Monitored." Nan's voice cut through the chatter. "The doctors said there's nothing wrong with her." Her tone was firm, but the worry in her eyes betrayed her. Nothing they could find, anyway. Meanwhile, Jake placed a hot cup of coffee beside Morgan, who sat silently in his home office, hunched over, shoulders stiff. He hadn't slept. Again. "You look like hell," Jake said, not unkindly. "You need rest." "I'm fine." "She's not." Jake hesitated. "You should let her see someone. A therapist, maybe. This isn't just nightmares anymore." Morgan didn't move. "Last time I brought it up, she locked herself in the guest room for 3 days." Jake exhaled. "Then at least get some space. Sleep in another room. You can't keep doing this." "She sleepwalks," Morgan cut in sharply. "Last week she almost walked off the staircase." "If I hadn't woken up," he stopped. His jaw clenched. Jake looked down, guilt creeping into his chest. He'd seen Morgan lose sleep, lose weight. He was watching a man unravel in slow motion. Every night, it was something new. Jenny crying with her eyes wide open, like some part of her was trapped between dreams and death. Other nights, she drifted through the halls like a ghost. Last night, she screamed like the house itself was burning. And through it all, no one could help her. Morgan stared into the steam rising from the coffee cup, his fingers wrapped tightly around the mug, as if grounding himself. The warmth did nothing to steady his nerves. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept through the night, not really. Maybe a few hours here and there. But restful sleep? That felt like a luxury he'd long forgotten. Last night's episode had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. Jenny's scream hadn't sounded human. It tore through the walls and froze the blood in his veins. By the time he reached her, she was standing barefoot in the hallway, eyes wide open, but gone. She was crying, mumbling something he couldn't understand, her face drenched in sweat and tears. She didn't even recognize him. He forced the memory away with a swallow of bitter coffee. "Call Dr. Reyes," he said finally, his voice low and frayed. "Tell him I want a referral. A psychiatrist. Or therapist. Whatever he recommends." Jake blinked. "You sure?" "I'm not letting this go on," Morgan said. "She needs help. And I can't keep guessing what to do next. I'm not a doctor." Jake nodded, already pulling out his phone. Morgan didn't move. His body begged for sleep, his eyes burned, his limbs ached, but his mind stayed sharp, haunted by what he might miss if he let himself rest. She could wake up crying again. She could wander. She could fall. And if he wasn't there? He set the coffee down and leaned forward, running both hands through his hair. He couldn't protect her like this. Not alone. But he would try. Until someone else could. A few days later, Jenny was hunched over the grand piano in the music room, her phone propped up on the stand. A piano app guided her through the chords with glowing keys and soft chimes, but her fingers stumbled over the notes. The melody came out uneven, hesitant, like her thoughts. Jake hovered by the doorway, waiting for a pause. When she finally lifted her hands with a frustrated sigh, he cleared his throat. "You've got an appointment," he said. Jenny turned slightly, her fingers still resting on the keys. What kind of appointment? Psychiatrist, Jake replied. Dr. Reyes made the referral. Jenny blinked. I'm not sick. I know, Jake said quickly. It's more like someone to talk to. About the sleepwalking. The screaming. She looked back at her phone, the soft glow of the app screen fading to the home screen. They already ran all the tests. Said nothing's wrong with me. Jake stepped forward a little. Morgan asked me to make sure you go. He's tied up with meetings all day or he'd take you himself. Jenny's jaw tightened. He really said that? Yeah, Jake nodded. He's worried. We all are. She stared at the piano keys for a moment, then gently closed the lid over them. He's always worrying. Last time, it was for nothing. Jake didn't argue. Still. It's just one appointment. Could help. After a beat, she stood up and grabbed her bag. Fine. But only so you'll all stop looking at me like I'm broken. Jake opened the door for her. I'll take that as a yes. The psychiatrist's office was warm, softly lit, and carefully impersonal. Jenny sat across from the doctor, legs crossed, arms loosely folded. Jake sat a little farther back, quietly jotting down notes on his phone at Morgan's request. So, Jenny, the psychiatrist began, tapping a pen against her clipboard, can you walk me through what's been happening during the night? Jenny shrugged. Nothing I remember. I mean, apparently I scream. Sleepwalk sometimes. But I wake up fine. Tired, maybe. But fine. The psychiatrist nodded. And how do you feel emotionally, day to day? Fine, Jenny replied, too quickly, flashing a tight smile. Morgan worries too much. Everyone does. I'm just a weird sleeper, I guess. Jake looked up, but said nothing. There's nothing in your chart to indicate any underlying neurological issues, the psychiatrist continued. But I do see here that you've had 2 miscarriages. Jenny's smile faltered. Her brows knit together. What does that have to do with anything? Well, the psychiatrist said gently, sometimes trauma, whether physical or emotional, can manifest in other ways. Night terrors and sleepwalking are often linked to repressed stress or unresolved grief. Jenny stiffened. I've already dealt with it. It's completely understandable not to want to relive it, but... I said I'm over it, Jenny cut in sharply. I don't need to talk about it. The psychiatrist paused, clearly taken aback by her tone. Jake, now sitting straighter in his chair, looked up from his phone. I was going to refer you to a therapist, the psychiatrist continued cautiously, just for someone to talk to, not because there's something wrong with you, but... No, Jenny said firmly. I don't want that. Silence settled between them. The doctor's pen hovered over the clipboard. Jake didn't type anything. Jenny stood up. Are we done? The psychiatrist hesitated, then nodded slowly. We're done for now. Jake rose without a word, following Jenny out the door. Her back was straight, her jaw set, but her hands were shaking slightly as she pushed open the door. The clinic doors swung open, and Jenny stepped out first, her stride stiff and quick. Her face was unreadable, but the rigid line of her shoulders and the way she clutched her bag told Jake everything he needed to know. He followed a few steps behind, silent, watching as the sunlight caught the tension in her posture. She didn't wait for him. Her heels struck the pavement harder than usual, like every step was a way to walk off the conversation still echoing in her head. When they reached the car, Jenny yanked the passenger door open with more force than necessary. She threw herself into the seat and slammed it shut, hard. The sound reverberated across the nearly empty parking lot, slicing through the stillness of the afternoon. Jake paused for a beat before getting in. He glanced toward her through the windshield. She was already facing away, staring blankly out the window, jaw clenched. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. He just needed to report his boss. Later that evening, Morgan sat in his home office, the amber glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows over scattered papers. The quiet was interrupted by a soft knock. "Come in," Morgan called without looking up. Jake stepped inside, his face serious, movements slower than usual. He closed the door behind him and approached the desk. Morgan finally looked up. "How did it go?" Jake hesitated, then placed a folded summary on the desk. "She didn't take it well." Morgan didn't reach for the paper. "She laughed things off at first, told the psychiatrist she's fine, nothing's wrong with her. Brushed everything aside like it was all a misunderstanding." Morgan's brow furrowed. Jake shifted his weight. "But then they brought up the miscarriages. Said it might be connected to the night terrors." Morgan's expression darkened. "That's when she changed," Jake continued. "Got defensive. Told the doctor she didn't want therapy. She snapped, actually, shut it down fast. Said she was over it, didn't want to talk about it. Wouldn't even let the doctor explain further." Morgan leaned back, silent. Jake added more quietly, "She slammed the car door after we left. Didn't say a word the whole way back." Morgan's jaw tensed. Jake hesitated before finally saying, "Look, I know you're trying to be careful with her. But I think she's not okay, Morgan. Just because she says she's over it doesn't mean she is." Morgan looked up at him. Silence stretched between them. Then Morgan gave a small nod, his face unreadable. "Thanks, Jake," he said quietly. Jake gave a respectful nod and quietly exited, leaving Morgan alone in the flickering hush of his office. The clock ticked. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, Morgan stared down at the appointment summary, but didn't open it. Mandy sat in front of the vanity mirror, slowly brushing out Jenny's long brown hair. The strands glinted under the soft lamplight, framing her pale face and striking blue eyes. She wore a white silk nightgown paired with a matching robe, the fabric whispering against her skin as she shifted in her seat. She replayed the events of the afternoon in her mind. The psychologist's mention of a therapist still lingered like an itch she couldn't scratch. It wasn't the talk of miscarriages that had unsettled her. She wasn't Jenny, after all. Those memories didn't belong to her. But the idea of sitting down and spilling thoughts to a stranger, that terrified her. What if she slipped? What if the truth, the real truth, spilled out? That she wasn't Jenny at all, but someone else living in her body? A sudden sound pulled her from her thoughts. The shower shut off. A moment later, Morgan stepped out of the bathroom, a white towel wrapped around his waist, another in his hand as he dried his tousled blonde hair. His pale skin was still damp and glistening under the warm lights. Mandy rose from the vanity and walked toward their bed. Morgan caught her gently from behind, his arms circling her waist, and began to kiss the side of her neck. She didn't need to guess what prompted this. Jake must have told him she'd been upset about the miscarriages. When she turned to look at him, Morgan's expression was tender, his blue eyes clouded with concern and guilt. He didn't say anything, just looked at her like he was trying to make things right without words. Mandy felt a twist in her gut. He really thought she was hurting. And he really cared. That made the lie feel heavier, crueler. But what could she say? That Jenny was already gone, and he was holding someone else? So, she didn't stop him. When he kissed her, she kissed him back. One thing led to another. The night passed slowly, wrapped in whispers and movement and heat. Morgan hadn't known what to say. The words never came easily, not about loss, not about pain, but he wanted to show her that she wasn't alone. That he still saw her. That he still loved her. Even if neither of them could put it into words. Morgan woke to the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, warming the room with a pale golden hue. He blinked, surprised by how rested he felt. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, he hadn't woken to Jenny's screams, her tears, or the hollow panic that often gripped him in the early hours. Jenny was still asleep beside him, her body curled against his, bare skin pressed to his. Their legs were tangled together beneath the sheets, her head resting on his chest, fingers lightly gripping his side as if afraid he'd slip away in her sleep. That's when it hit him. There had been no night terrors. Not even a whimper. Nothing. His mind drifted back, combing through the haze of memories and sleepless nights, and he realized something else. The last time she'd slept this peacefully was also after they had made love. It wasn't just coincidence. It couldn't be. The thought crept in slowly at first, then settled with weight. If the miscarriages were at the root of her night terrors, if grief was clawing through her subconscious, then maybe the answer was another baby. A second chance. But then he remembered how broken she'd been after the first miscarriage. How she shut down after the second. The silence, the tears she thought he didn't see, the way she stopped talking about the future. She had barely recovered, if at all. Could she survive another loss? He didn't know. He wasn't even sure what the right answer was. But he knew one thing: he couldn't let her go through that kind of pain again. Not alone. Not ever again. Still, last night had given him something he hadn't felt in a while: hope. She'd slept soundly, safe in his arms. No nightmares. No tears. Just peace. That night, he tested his theory again. And once more, she remained asleep, undisturbed, wrapped in his embrace. Now, as he held her, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, Morgan brushed her brown hair away from her face, his fingers trailing lightly along her temple. She looked so calm, so young. It made his chest ache. He didn't use protection. He hadn't even thought to. A part of him didn't want to. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe it was reckless. But maybe, just maybe, it was what she needed. He kissed the top of her head gently and closed his eyes. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine the future. A real one. With her. With them. And maybe, with a child they could keep. Chapter 11. I was 23 when Jenny told me she was pregnant. She had just turned 18, barely a week into adulthood, and I swear, I felt the world tilt under my feet. One reckless night. That's all it took to turn my already crumbling life upside down. I had just graduated a year earlier. Still paying off student loans. Still pretending I knew what the hell I was doing with my father's company, which was already drowning in debt and gasping for air. Lancaster Incorporated was circling the drain, and I was too proud, and too scared, to admit it. And then came Jenny. And then came the pregnancy. But nothing compared to what happened next. My mother's eyes lit up the moment she found out. Not with concern. Not with shock. But with opportunity. She didn't waste a second. She leaned into Jenny's innocence, her vulnerability, and spun it into a neat little plan: marriage. Her reasoning? Public scrutiny. Save face. Do the right thing. Bullshit. What she wanted was Jenny's last name, her bloodline. Colin Corporation was the lifeline Lancaster Incorporated so desperately needed, and Jenny was the key to it. She was young. Kind. Naive. She didn't know what she was being pulled into. And somehow, neither did I, until it was already too late. The wedding was rushed. We might as well have eloped in Vegas. There were no grand vows. No planning. No fairy tale. Just paperwork and pressure and my mother's ever-tightening grip on our lives. I had never been more ashamed of her than I was in that moment, watching her smile, watching her lie through her teeth, selling Jenny a dream that didn't exist. She used Jenny like a pawn, and I let her. I let it happen because I didn't know how to stop it. Jenny only found out about the real state of Lancaster Incorporated after the wedding. And I could see it in her eyes, that slow, sinking realization that she had been thrown into something far more complicated than she ever expected. But being Jenny, she didn't complain. She didn't panic. Instead, she offered me her company. She asked me to run Colin Corporation for her while she finished college. I didn't even get a chance to answer. My mother stepped in for me, of course, said yes on my behalf, using Jenny's pregnancy as the excuse. "Stress isn't good for the baby," she said, ever the puppet master. And just like that, I became CEO of 2 companies. One I was barely keeping afloat. The other? A corporate giant that didn't trust me, didn't want me, and barely tolerated me. The Colin board members made their disdain known from day one. Jenny had no idea what she had given me. What she'd been manipulated into giving. And maybe I should have walked away. Maybe I should have refused. But I didn't. Jenny and I had been married for barely a month when it happened. She was only 10 weeks along. The call came while I was in the middle of a budget meeting. Lancaster Incorporated was bleeding out, and I was trying to keep the board from staging a mutiny. My phone buzzed, and I stepped out, more annoyed than worried. But when I heard the words, Jenny, hospital, miscarriage, everything else evaporated. I drove like a man possessed. My hands were clenched so tight around the steering wheel I didn't even realize they were shaking until I hit the brakes in front of the ER. And when the nurse confirmed it, said it was over, I stood there frozen, dry-mouthed and dazed, nodding along while some part of me whispered something I still hate myself for. Thank God. It lasted a second. Maybe less. But it was real. I felt it. That flicker of relief, that instinctive breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It made everything that followed even harder to live with. When I stepped into Jenny's room, she looked so small. She was curled into herself, her hair damp with sweat, her skin pale against the hospital sheets. She looked up at me with swollen eyes, and before I could say a word, she started apologizing. Over and over. Like she'd broken something precious. Like she'd failed me. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, fingers tangled in the sterile hospital blanket, watching her break in slow motion. Jenny stood in front of me, barefoot on the cold floor, her shoulders trembling beneath that white silk robe. She was holding onto my arm, no, clinging to it, her fingers curled tightly around the sleeve of my pajama shirt like she thought if she let go, I'd vanish. Tears streamed down her cheeks, one after the other, soaking the thin silk. Her face was blotchy, lips trembling as she tried to speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I know the baby was the only reason you married me, but, please, please don't leave me." Her grip on my sleeve tightened. She was tugging at it gently, like a child desperate for reassurance, and it was tearing something out of me. "I'll be better. I promise. I'll do better next time. Just don't divorce me." I didn't speak. Couldn't. I just stood there, feeling every word like a blade to the ribs. She looked so lost. So young. Just 18, and already she'd lost her parents, her baby, and now she was standing in front of me, begging me not to abandon her too. And I couldn't even look her in the eye. Because somewhere deep inside, I had been relieved. For one brief, shameful second, I'd felt a crushing weight lift the moment the nurse told me she'd miscarried. That thought, that instinct, I knew it would haunt me for the rest of my life. So I did the only thing I could. I reached out and pulled her into my arms, holding her so tightly it almost hurt. I buried my face in her hair, hoping she wouldn't feel how hard I was shaking. "I'm here," I whispered finally, though the words felt hollow. I wasn't sure if she believed me. I wasn't sure if I believed me. But I held her anyway, while she cried into my shirt, while my sleeve stayed balled in her fist. And all I could do was stand there and let the silence speak all the things I was too much of a coward to say. I couldn't bear to look at her. Not because she disgusted me. No, quite the opposite. It was me I couldn't face. Every time I walked into the house and saw her curled up on the couch, or sitting in silence by the window, or pretending to read a book she hadn't turned a page of in hours, I saw everything I couldn't admit aloud. That when the nurse told me she lost the baby, I felt relieved. God, just thinking it made my chest tighten. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was cruel. But I wasn't ready. I was 23, drowning in debt, suffocating under the weight of my father's company teetering on collapse, and suddenly the girl I barely knew, the girl my mother manipulated into marriage, was carrying my child. So when the child was gone, part of me exhaled. And I hated myself for it. That guilt, dirty, heavy, ever-present, became the fuel that lit everything else on fire. I buried myself in work. Stayed later. Came home long after Jenny had fallen asleep or cried herself into exhaustion trying. Lancaster Incorporated clawed its way back from the edge because I made it. I was ruthless. I cut ties, brokered deals, secured contracts that should have taken months in a matter of weeks. I stood my ground against the Collin Corporation board, who looked at me like I was an unwanted parasite latched onto their fortune. They wanted to see me fall. I didn't give them the satisfaction. But at home? I was failing. The house felt colder. Jenny's laughter, soft and warm, was gone. Replaced by a kind of quiet I couldn't fix. The kind that stretched out between us like a canyon neither of us knew how to cross. And I knew why. She was grieving. Not just the baby. She was grieving her parents, her old life, the version of her future that had crumbled in her hands. And where was I? Not with her. Not really. Just a ghost that came home at midnight, kissed her forehead, and collapsed into bed with nothing left to give. She needed a family. I needed survival. I still remember the way she looked at me when I told her, maybe it's for the best. Maybe, this wasn't the right time. Her eyes, so blue, so trusting, just dimmed. I promised her we'd try again. When things settled. When life wasn't so fragile. I told her she should focus on college, that I'd handle things for now. That someday, we'd make it right. But I never said when. Because deep down, I didn't know if I deserved a second chance. Not after how I failed her the first time. A year after the miscarriage, just when things finally started to settle down, Jenny enrolled in college. I remember the way her eyes lit up when the acceptance letter came in, like it was the first step back to something normal. Meanwhile, I was working non-stop, juggling 2 companies and trying to keep both Lancaster Incorporated and Collin Corporation afloat. It felt like, for once, we were inching towards something that resembled peace. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 3 breast cancer. My mother. I should have felt more, something. Anger, fear, devastation. But all I felt was numb. Jenny, on the other hand, Jenny didn't hesitate. She showed up at every single chemo appointment. She sat by my mother's bedside when I couldn't or wouldn't. She brought warm meals, knitted scarves, and stayed late just to hold her hand. It was Jenny who cared for her, not out of duty, but love. Even after everything. Even after my mother manipulated her into marrying me, used her grief and innocence like a tool for survival, Jenny never held it against her. Not once. She never saw my mother as a conniving woman who orchestrated a marriage to save a crumbling empire. She saw her as someone who was there for her when no one else was. After losing her parents and our baby, it was my mother who stayed up with her through sleepless nights, who whispered reassurances in the dark when I was too buried in work or too ashamed to look her in the eye. Jenny saw her as a real mother. So when my mother got sick, Jenny dropped everything. She left school, just like that. Said she didn't want to regret not being there, didn't want to lose another mother. She never mentioned her classes again, never talked about going back. By the time the cancer went into remission 3 years later, she had already fallen too far behind. Most of her peers had graduated. She acted like it didn't bother her, like she'd made peace with it, but I knew her better than that. When the cancer returned, stage 4 this time, Jenny never left her side. And when my mother died a year later, Jenny mourned like she had lost her own blood. Watching her grieve over the very woman who had manipulated her, it did something to me. Broke something, maybe. Or revealed something I didn't want to admit, that Jenny had more grace and forgiveness in her than I ever did. Back to present day. The sun was already high when Morgan and Jenny finally made their way to the breakfast table. The crisp morning light filtered through the tall windows, spilling across the polished floor and the linen-covered tables set with fresh fruit, warm bread, and eggs made to order. Jake entered with a stack of letters and a silver tray, pausing for just a moment when he noticed something odd, something different. Morgan looked well rested. Jenny, too. There were no dark circles under her eyes, no tremble in her hand as she reached for her coffee. Their eyes met often, and each time they did, there was a quiet sort of ease, a softness that had been absent for months. Nan, who'd been pouring orange juice, caught Jake's eye and raised a brow, clearly noticing the same thing. The other household staff, too, moved about with discreet curiosity, stealing glances as they passed. The lack of exhaustion in both their master and mistress was too obvious not to notice. It had been weeks, no, months, since either of them had come to the table without a shadow hanging over them. Jake cleared his throat as he placed the tray between them. This came in the morning delivery. An invitation for the two of you, an exclusive auction gala next weekend. Black tie. Morgan picked it up without a word, scanning the elegant cardstock. Jenny leaned in beside him, their shoulders brushing. The moment lingered. You think we should go? She asked quietly, almost playfully. Morgan looked at her. It's been a while since we've gone out together. Jake couldn't help but stare for a second longer than he should have. There was something unmistakably intimate in the way they spoke now, light, but meaningful. Like something fractured had begun to mend. He excused himself. Nan followed soon after, whispering to the younger maid under her breath, maybe the worst is behind them. Neither Morgan nor Jenny noticed. Their world, for the moment, was just the two of them, basking in a rare and fragile calm. Chapter 12. Jenny sat poised in front of her vanity, the soft glow of the bulb-lined mirror casting a golden hue across her fair skin. Her long, straight brown hair, now glossy from the serum she'd run through it, fell down her back like silk. She was curling the ends carefully, twisting them around a slim barrel wand to create a soft wave, giving her hair more volume without ruining its sleek elegance. Her bangs framed her doll-like face, her blue eyes, made even larger by a dusting of shimmery eyeshadow and subtly lined lids, blinked slowly as she focused on perfecting the last curl. Her makeup was delicate and youthful, inspired by the effortless charm of K-pop idols. A faint pink flush colored her cheeks, and a hint of shimmer sat just below her eyes, making them sparkle when she moved. Her lips were glossy, tinted a soft cherry red that made them appear plump and inviting, almost unreal, like something painted on porcelain. Behind her, their walk-in closet hummed with quiet activity. Morgan stood near his suit display, dressed already in a tailored black and white ensemble. He examined his collection of watches with narrowed eyes before selecting a sleek black one with a silver trim. His blonde hair was perfectly styled, every strand in place, the result of years of knowing exactly how he liked it. Mandy, inhabiting Jenny's body, gave herself a small smile in the mirror. The girl staring back at her didn't look like someone who had once curled up crying in hospital sheets. She looked ethereal. Untouchable. Her lavender gown clung to her frame in all the right places, cinching at the waist and falling in a backless cascade that shimmered with every slight movement. Tiny pearls were sewn into the bodice, subtle enough to catch the light without screaming for attention. She turned from the vanity and walked across the room to the mirrored closet wall, pulling open a glass display case that showcased her clutches like works of art. She selected a glittering silver one and held it delicately in her hand, pausing to look at her full reflection. The gown's backless cut exposed her spotless skin, and the lavender tone offset the pale tone of her complexion like it had been made for her. Just as she turned to head for the door, Morgan stepped out from his side of the closet holding up a black silk tie. He didn't need to say a word, just the way he held it, slightly raised with one eyebrow quirked, said everything. Jenny walked over to him with a quiet smile, taking the tie in her hands. "You always forget this part," she teased softly. "I don't forget," he said, stepping closer. "I like when you do it." Mandy sifted through Jenny's memories quickly, pulling up the technique like it was muscle memory. Her fingers moved with confidence, looping and folding the tie into a clean, sharp knot. Morgan's gaze, however, wasn't on the tie. His eyes roamed her figure, from the soft line of her jaw to the way the gown hugged her body. He paused at the sight of her bare back, one hand twitching slightly as if resisting the urge to touch it. You look beautiful, he murmured. Jenny looked up at him, her lips parting in a small, glossy smile. Thank you. She gave the knot a final tug and straightened his collar. Morgan didn't hesitate, his hands found her waist, pulling her gently against him as he leaned down and kissed her. Her lips, shiny and warm, met his in a brief but sweet exchange that made Mandy's heart skip for reasons she didn't understand. They lingered for a second longer before parting. Morgan stepped back first, offering his arm. Shall we? Jenny took it, her clutch in one hand, the scent of her lavender perfume trailing behind her like a whisper. As they walked out of the bedroom, side by side, it felt, for a brief, fragile moment, like they were in sync. Like nothing had ever broken. The sleek black luxury car purred to a stop in front of the grand venue, its polished surface reflecting the glittering lights strung across the entrance. A velvet rope kept a crowd of photographers at bay, their cameras already flashing in anticipation. The moment the chauffeur opened the door, a hush of suspense fell over the crowd. Morgan stepped out first, commanding attention in his tailored black and white suit. His posture was effortlessly confident, his expression unreadable beneath the strobes of flashing bulbs. Then he turned, offering his hand. Jenny stepped out like a vision. The lavender gown shimmered under the lights, the fabric clinging to her in elegant waves. The low back of the dress revealed a perfect expanse of pale skin, and her blue eyes sparkled with a softness that only deepened her porcelain-like beauty. Her curled hair bounced gently as she moved, her bangs casting delicate shadows over her eyes. Her hand slipped into Morgan's as if it had always belonged there. Cameras clicked in a frenzy. They walked the red carpet side by side, a striking pair, him, the cool and composed CEO, and her, the ethereal wife whose quiet beauty stole breaths and headlines. Off to the side, standing just beyond the press line, Celine watched them with tightly crossed arms. Her figure was flawless as always, dressed in a bold red gown that clung to her like a second skin, but her expression betrayed her. There was envy behind her eyes. Jenny glanced her way and offered the faintest smile, not smug, not cruel, just perfectly pleasant, as if Celine weren't even worth the effort of animosity. And then she turned her attention back to Morgan, who gave her hand the smallest, reassuring squeeze. Inside, the ballroom glowed with soft golden light and the murmur of high society. The auction would begin soon, but already, heads were turning to whisper. They came together. They're still standing. And Jenny, with her small, doll-like smile, walked a little taller. The interior of the ballroom was dressed in timeless luxury, polished floors that gleamed under the chandeliers, elegant round tables draped in ivory linen, and gilded chairs arranged to frame the small stage at the front. Soft classical music hummed in the background as servers floated through the crowd offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Laughter and polite conversation rippled through the space, blending with the clinking of crystal. Jenny walked beside Morgan with poise, her lavender gown trailing gracefully behind her as they made their way through the crowd. A few heads turned in admiration, or curiosity, but Jenny stayed focused. She recognized many faces, but only one made her expression soften. Lorenzo, she greeted, her voice warm as she spotted her cousin standing by the floral arch near the wine bar. He turned at once, his familiar smirk appearing. Jenny, Lorenzo James said, setting down his glass of red wine to pull her into a casual hug. You look like an angel that got invited to a corporate board meeting. Jenny laughed lightly. And you still talk like you're writing your own press releases. Morgan extended his hand, which Lorenzo shook firmly. Lorenzo nodded in acknowledgement, his tone polite but neutral. Lorenzo, Morgan returned with a respectful nod, his expression unreadable as always. Didn't expect to see both of you here, Lorenzo said with a slightly raised brow. Then again, this is the year of Lancaster family rebranding, isn't it? Jenny gave him a look, half amused, half warning. We're here to support a good cause. Right, the hospital, Lorenzo said, sipping his wine. Your grandfather would have approved. Or at least pretended to if it got him another golf wing. Morgan chuckled under his breath, easing the tension. We'll see if we can get the Lancaster name on something less recreational. A few of Jenny's aunts and uncles approached, greeting her with the usual mix of warmth and thinly veiled curiosity. There were hugs, cheek kisses, and polite questions about health and family. Morgan stood close, offering small smiles and a few practiced words. He was familiar with these performances. They were soon ushered to their table, prime seating near the front, marked Lancaster James. It was tastefully decorated with pearl-white roses and silver cutlery. Jenny sat between Morgan and Lorenzo, with their respective families flanking either side. Celine, in contrast, was seated far in the back, closer to the open bar than the stage. She was with two young politicians and a couple of aging industrialists, none of whom seemed particularly interesting to her. She kept glancing across the ballroom toward the Lancasters' table, her red lips pursed in silent bitterness. Back at the main table, conversations turned to business. One executive leaned over and asked Morgan, "Is it true you're expanding into sustainable real estate?" Morgan nodded slightly. "We're researching green steel for the next round of developments." Lorenzo, sipping from his wine glass, added dryly, "If he pulls it off, he'll be the first Lancaster to build something that won't fall apart in 5 years. Jenny smirked. "Don't be rude. At least he doesn't sell overpriced watches with his initials on them." "I'll have you know, the LJ collection is thriving," Lorenzo said dramatically, placing a hand over his chest. "Luxury is timeless." Morgan leaned closer to Jenny with a half-smile. "Remind me to never let him near our marketing team." She whispered back, "He'd make your slogan, 'Bleed Money Beautifully.'" As laughter gently rippled across their table, a soft chime rang throughout the ballroom. The lights dimmed slightly. A woman in a silver dress stepped onto the stage with a microphone in hand and a graceful smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, and thank you for attending tonight's charity auction. Your generosity will go toward the construction of St. Agatha's Children's Hospital, set to open next year." The room slowly settled into silence, save for the rustle of programs being opened and the occasional clink of a glass. Morgan's hand brushed over Jenny's knee beneath the table, a simple gesture, grounding her. She looked up at him and smiled quietly, her small, doll-like features radiant under the golden lights. They were ready to play their part. The auction began with polite applause as the first item was wheeled onto the stage, a large oil painting of a misty Italian countryside, framed in ornate gold leaf. The auctioneer, an older gentleman with a booming voice and charming flair, took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, our first piece tonight is by renowned artist Gianni Bensini, Whispers of Tuscany, starting at $25,000. A few paddles rose immediately, and the numbers climbed steadily. Jenny watched with mild interest as the painting went to a collector seated 2 tables down. Next came a pair of gilded French candelabras from the 18th century, followed by an elaborate Chinese porcelain vase rumored to have once belonged to a Spanish governor. The next item is a rare Art Deco brooch from the 1920s, platinum and sapphire set, the auctioneer announced. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room as the jeweled piece sparkled under the spotlight. "I'd wear that," Lorenzo whispered beside Jenny. Jenny smirked. "You'd lose it in your gym bag." One by one, items were claimed by enthusiastic collectors and well-dressed donors. The mood was light, energized by competition and champagne. As the evening wore on, the lights on stage dimmed briefly. A velvet-covered stand was rolled into place. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer said with a flourish, "one of our final and most exquisite items of the evening, a rare pink diamond, 3.2 carats, cushion-cut, set on a delicate white gold chain. This stone comes from a private collection and has never been worn until tonight." A hush fell over the room. Jenny's breath caught in her throat as the soft spotlight revealed the glistening gem. The diamond shimmered like a drop of rose-colored dew. Even amid the glittering guests and golden decor, the necklace stood out. Opening bid, $5 million. A few paddles rose. One bidder from the shipping industry. Another from a jewelry house. But it was Morgan, silent until now, who raised his paddle with effortless calm. $10 million, he said clearly. The room stirred. The auctioneer blinked. "We have $10 million from Mr. Lancaster." No one challenged it. Going once, going twice. A pause. Sold. Polite applause followed, but all Jenny heard was the thud of her own heart. An assistant in white gloves brought the necklace over in a velvet box. Morgan stood, accepted it without fanfare, and turned to face Jenny. She rose slowly, stunned. "I saw the way you looked at it," he murmured. With careful hands, Morgan unfastened the clasp and gently draped the necklace around her neck. The pink diamond sat just above her collarbone, gleaming against her fair skin and lavender gown. "Perfect," he said softly as he secured the clasp. "Now no one will question who you belong to." Jenny's cheeks colored. Her doll-like lips curved into a radiant smile as her blue eyes gazed up at him. "Thank you," she whispered, genuinely moved. From the other end of the ballroom, Celine sat frozen at her table, a flute of untouched champagne in her hand. Her eyes narrowed, lips tightening as she watched Morgan lean down and kiss Jenny's cheek. She didn't clap. She didn't even blink. The pink diamond sparkled with every movement Jenny made, each step, each turn of her head, as if it were made to catch not just the light, but envy. And it did. Lorenzo narrowed his eyes at Jenny once more before stepping away to whisper something to one of his business partners. After a short exchange, he returned and leaned close to her ear. "The night's still not over," he muttered, nodding discreetly toward the other side of the ballroom. "Look over there." Jenny followed his gaze and immediately spotted her, Celine, standing near the champagne tower, laughing a little too loudly at something a young diplomat had said. Her posture was elegant as always, but her eyes flicked constantly toward Morgan. "If he speaks to her," Lorenzo continued, voice low and sharp, "we're still going to mess with his project. Just a heads up." Jenny's smile didn't falter, but it tightened around the edges. She turned slightly to face him more fully, voice soft but firm. "Everything is going well these days. Please don't ruin it by interfering in my husband's business. Just let him have this one." Lorenzo chuckled under his breath, straightening up. "Well, his luck depends on whether or not he behaves. Doesn't it?" Before Jenny could reply, a familiar voice called out from nearby. "Jenny. Over here." She turned and saw her Aunt Clarice waving, dressed in a floor-length emerald green gown with her signature pearls. Beside her stood Uncle Roberto, drink in hand, and several other relatives from the James side of the family. Jenny quickly composed herself and walked over, her expression brightening. "Aunt Clarice," she said warmly, kissing her aunt on both cheeks. "You look stunning tonight." "And you're glowing," Clarice said, looking her up and down. "That color on you, it's like lavender silk was made for your skin. Your mother would have cried tears of joy seeing you tonight." Jenny smiled gently. "Thank you. You've always known what to say to make me tear up. Where's your husband?" Uncle Roberto asked, scanning the crowd. "He didn't run off with the diamond, did he?" Jenny laughed. "He's around. Probably talking to the mayor about zoning permits." Another cousin leaned in, grinning. "Can't believe he bought that pink diamond just now. Everyone's talking." Jenny reached up, fingers lightly brushing the jewel on her collarbone. "I guess he wanted to make a statement." Clarice raised a knowing brow. "He made one all right." I saw Celine's face from across the room. She looked like she bit into a lemon. They all chuckled, including Lorenzo, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just make sure he doesn't forget who he's married to," Clarice added, her voice dropping. "This family may smile, but we don't forget. We take care of our own." Jenny gave a nod, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She could feel Celine's stare on the back of her neck, and Lorenzo's warning still echoed in her head. The night was far from over. Jenny smiled politely in front of her relatives, nodding along to the conversation, her posture perfect, her laughter light. But inside, Mandy was trembling. The weight of the James family's veiled disdain for Morgan clung to her like a second skin. It wasn't just a cold shoulder, it was a quiet judgment that simmered just beneath the surface. Their body language was cordial, but stiff. Eyes lingered too long on Morgan's empty seat. Whispers floated behind glasses of champagne. They didn't trust him. And why would they? In their eyes, Morgan Lancaster was an outsider, one who came from a declining business empire and somehow managed to marry their niece, a grieving girl still reeling from the loss of her parents. They didn't see a love story, they saw a man who swooped in during her most vulnerable moment. A man who benefited from their inattention. Mandy, living in Jenny's skin, felt the weight of those perceptions. They thought he was a swindler. That he married Jenny for her inheritance. That her heart had been taken advantage of, and they were too late to stop it. Just then, Uncle Roberto leaned in with a smile too sharp to be friendly. "So, Jenny, when will you and Morgan be giving us a little one, Jenny's breath caught for half a second, but she smiled as naturally as she could manage. "We haven't really set a timeline," she said gently. Clarice chimed in, "You're young, healthy, and from a good family. There's no reason to wait too long, dear. Family is everything." Jenny nodded awkwardly, heart pounding. Then came the more pointed follow-up from one of the older uncles, half joking, half not. "Well, you two are sharing a bed, right?" Jenny's face turned a shade of red that matched the rose in her glass. She fumbled for words, then nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. We've been very active. For days on end now, actually." Clarice raised an eyebrow with a slow smile. "That's good. Just make sure to keep an eye on him. A man his age, that attractive, if he's not coming to you, he's going to someone else. Lack of activity could be a bad sign." Jenny's stomach twisted, but she kept her composure. "It's not an issue, Aunt. Really. Things between us have been more than fine." Roberto chuckled. "Then maybe it's time to get serious about that baby, huh? You've been married long enough. What are you two waiting for?" Jenny's fingers tightened slightly around her clutch, but her smile held. It was never off the table. "We've just been juggling so much with Lancaster Incorporated and Collin Corporation. There's a lot going on behind the scenes." The family nodded understandingly, though their looks suggested a hint of impatience. Still, they backed off, at least for the moment. None of them knew. None of them knew that Jenny had already tried. That she'd already lost, twice. That her body still remembered the pain, and her heart bore the bruises. Mandy blinked back the sudden sting in her eyes and smiled again, grateful that they couldn't tell the difference.